It was supposed to be the perfect weekend getaway, a break from the chaos of city life. Just me and my 3 friends, tucked away in a small cabin deep in the woods. We'd been planning this trip for months. The cabin was supposed to be the ideal escape, far from the noise and clutter of everyday life. Just fresh air, wide open spaces, and some quality time with the people I cared about most. But what I didn't know, what none of us knew, was that this cabin, in this remote stretch of forest, wasn't the refuge we thought it was. It was something else, something darker. We drove up Friday afternoon, our excitement buzzing in the air. The winding roads up into the mountains were narrow, and the trees stood tall, their dark branches stretching out like fingers reaching for the sky. But once we turned off the main road, the path became even more isolated. The GPS had long since stopped working. No cell signal, nothing. At first, we joked about how we'd be cut off from civilization, how we could pretend to be off the grid for a while. But deep down, I was starting to feel uneasy. The cabin was small, quaint, almost too perfect in its solitude. Wooden walls, a fireplace, and a front porch that overlooked nothing but an endless stretch of trees. There were no neighbors for miles. The place was the kind of thing you'd expect to find in a storybook, a secluded paradise. But when we stepped inside, it had that odd smell of old wood and dust, like no one had been here in years. "All right, let's get settled in," said Ben, tossing his duffel bag onto one of the beds. Ben was the most outgoing of the group, the kind of guy who'd try to make a joke out of anything, even in the most uncomfortable situations. But even he couldn't hide the way his voice faltered when we first arrived. He was trying to keep it together, but I saw the way his eyes darted around the room, like he was already feeling something we couldn't name. "Something feels off about this place," Sarah muttered, pulling open the curtains. She was always the observant one, the skeptic who never bought into the idea of coincidence. She glanced at me as she spoke. "I don't know, it just feels too quiet, you know?" I nodded. I felt it too. The silence. It wasn't the peaceful silence of nature. It was the kind of silence that made you feel like something was lurking just beyond the trees, something waiting to make itself known. As we unpacked, we did our best to shake off the feeling, focusing on getting the fire started and cracking open a few beers. The night passed like it was supposed to. Easy conversation, laughter, and the sound of the fire crackling in the hearth. But when the lights went out later that evening, without any storm or warning, it felt like something had shifted in the air. "Great," Mike said, his voice cutting through the darkness as we fumbled for flashlights. "Of course, the lights go out." "Yeah, classic," I replied, trying to hide the anxiety creeping up in my chest. "Let's just find the circuit breaker." We made our way into the small basement, stumbling over uneven steps, the only light coming from the beam of our flashlights. There was something unsettling about the place. Even in the dim light, the walls were lined with old tools, some of them rusted and unused. A faint musty odor filled the air, and the floorboards creaked with every step. Ben found the circuit breaker, but when he flipped the switch, nothing happened. "Okay, what the hell?" Ben said, a little more anxious than usual. "It should be working. Maybe it's a fuse," Sarah suggested, her voice low. She seemed unnerved too. "We'll have to check the fuse box." We spent another 20 minutes down there, searching for a fuse box or anything that might explain the blackout. It wasn't until Mike called out to us from the other side of the basement that we found something strange, something we weren't supposed to find. "Hey, guys, you need to come over here," Mike said, his voice shaky. We hurried over to him, all of us confused. He was crouching by the far wall, pulling a stack of old crates away from a corner. When he did, we saw it. A small, wooden door, half hidden behind the crates. The kind of door you might find in a forgotten corner of an old house. It was barely noticeable, and yet, it felt wrong. "Is this the fuse box?" Ben asked, but none of us had ever seen anything like it before. The door creaked as Mike tugged it open. Behind it was a small, dusty room, almost like a closet, and inside, a strange set of old, tattered photographs, pinned to the walls. They were all black and white, faded by time, and all of them were of people we didn't know, people who seemed to be watching us. But the most unsettling part? The date on one of the photos was from the 1950s. That was odd, sure, but even more unnerving was the fact that one of the people in the photo looked like me, or at least, someone who looked exactly like me. Before any of us could say anything, the door slammed shut on its own, sending all of us into a panic. "That's it," Sarah said, her voice a mix of disbelief and fear. "I'm done, we need to leave." But the thought of leaving wasn't so simple anymore, not with the night closing in around us, and with whatever was watching us from the woods, from that basement. I knew it wasn't just the house that was keeping us here. Something else was. This story seems to be getting scarier, doesn't it? If you want more stories like this, be sure to like and subscribe to the channel. This helps create even more scary for you. We didn't talk much after the door slammed shut. We were all in shock, but we couldn't shake the feeling that something had changed, something fundamental. It wasn't just the weird photo or the fact that it looked like I was in it. It was the way the room had felt when the door closed, like the air turned heavier, like the house itself was holding its breath. "Let's just go back upstairs," Ben finally said, breaking the silence. "We'll figure this out in the morning. Maybe we're all just freaking ourselves out." But we all knew that wasn't it. The house wasn't right. There was something off about it, something we couldn't put into words. I could feel my heart racing as I led the way back to the stairs. We all followed, but no one said a word. When we got back to the living room, Sarah went straight for the windows. She pulled open the curtains and stared out into the dark woods. "Do you hear that?" she asked quietly. I couldn't hear anything at first, but then, something shifted in the air. It wasn't the sound of wind or rustling leaves. It was the sound of something or someone moving out there, just beyond the trees. I shook my head, trying to dismiss the thought. "It's probably just animals," I said, though my voice was unconvincing. "We're in the middle of the woods, Sarah." "Yeah, I know," she replied, still staring out the window. "But there's something off. It's too quiet now." Ben walked over to her and placed a hand on her shoulder. "Hey, we're fine. There's nothing out there. Let's just grab a drink and forget about it for tonight." It didn't help. No matter how many times we tried to distract ourselves, the tension hung in the air like smoke. Every time we spoke, every time we tried to laugh or have a normal conversation, I could feel it, the unease, the constant watchful feeling, like the house itself was listening, waiting. We decided to go to bed early that night, hoping that sleep would bring some relief. But as I lay in the darkness, the silence pressing in around me, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. I kept thinking about the photo in the basement, the one that looked like me. My mind kept circling back to it, unable to settle. I rolled over in bed, trying to find a comfortable position, but just as I was about to drift off, I heard something. A soft thud. I froze, my heart pounding in my chest. It wasn't loud, just faint, like someone was moving downstairs. I waited, listening, but the house was still, not a sound. After what felt like hours, I convinced myself it was just my imagination. I shut my eyes and tried to go back to sleep. Then the noise came again. A thud, louder this time, followed by a scraping sound, like someone dragging something heavy across the floor. I sat up, my breath catching in my throat. The others were asleep, or at least they appeared to be. I didn't want to wake them, but I knew I couldn't ignore this. The noise was coming from downstairs, from the same spot in the house where we had found that strange room. I got up, careful not to make a sound. My feet were cold against the wooden floor as I tiptoed toward the stairs, my body tense with fear. I reached the top of the stairs, and the noise stopped. I waited, my mind racing. Was it just the house settling, or was there someone down there? I crept down the hallway, my hand gripping the railing. The dim light from the moon outside filtered in through the windows, casting long shadows on the walls. Every step I took seemed to make the house creak louder. When I reached the bottom of the stairs, I didn't hear anything anymore. I stood there, frozen, staring into the dark hallway. Then I saw it. The door to the basement was cracked open, just slightly. It hadn't been like that when we left. I knew that for sure. I wasn't sure what to do. Should I go back upstairs and wake the others? Should I investigate the basement? I stepped closer to the door, my pulse racing. The moment I put my hand on the doorknob, I heard it. A faint whisper, like someone was just behind me. "Don't go down there." I spun around, but there was no one except the empty house, staring back at me with dark, vacant eyes. I pushed the door open, the hinges squealing with resistance. I descended the stairs slowly, the cold air wrapping around me like an unseen hand. The basement was just as I remembered it, creaky and musty, filled with the smell of old wood and rust. I shined the flashlight on the far wall, hoping to catch a glimpse of something, anything that would explain the noise, but the basement was still. Then, just as I turned to leave, I saw it. Something was out of place. The crates we had moved earlier, they were back, piled against the wall, exactly where they had been before. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was the note that had been placed on top of the crates, a scrap of yellowed paper, folded neatly. I didn't want to open it. My hand trembled as I unfolded the paper. The handwriting was strange, old-fashioned. The words were simple, but they made my blood run cold. "You shouldn't have come here. It never ends." Suddenly, I felt it. The temperature dropped. A chill ran up my spine, and I turned to look around the basement. There, standing in the corner of the room, was a figure. A person. But they weren't facing me. They were turned away, staring at the wall. I backed up slowly, the light from my flashlight trembling in my hand. The figure didn't move, didn't acknowledge my presence. It was as if they were waiting. I couldn't take it anymore. I turned and ran back up the stairs, my heart pounding in my chest. When I got back to the living room, I slammed the door behind me, panting for air. I felt like I was about to lose my mind. I glanced over at the others. Ben and Mike were still asleep. Sarah was curled up on the couch, her face pale and tense. It was like they didn't hear anything, like they were in a completely different world. But I knew I wasn't imagining it. Something was here. Something was waiting. I couldn't sleep after what happened in the basement. The room felt too small, too claustrophobic, like the walls were slowly closing in around me. The sense of dread that had gripped me earlier was now a constant presence, lurking just beneath the surface. Every creak of the house, every gust of wind outside, made my heart race with fear. But the worst part? I couldn't shake the feeling that we weren't alone. The others didn't seem to notice. They were still asleep, oblivious to the strange happenings around us. But I couldn't forget what I had seen, that figure, standing in the basement, staring at the wall like it was waiting for something. I had to know what it was, but I wasn't about to go back down there alone. I sat up in the dark room, staring at the glowing numbers on my watch. It was just past 3 a.m. The house was dead silent. Even the wind had died down, leaving the air unnaturally still. I could feel my own breath, shallow and quick, as if the house itself was holding its breath with me. I needed to leave. The thought hit me like a jolt of adrenaline. I grabbed my jacket from the back of the chair, trying to be as quiet as possible. If I could make it to the car, I could drive back to town. I could get help, or at least get away from whatever was happening here. But just as I reached for the door, I heard something. A soft knock. It came from the window. I froze. I knew that no one else was awake. There was no one out there. The idea of someone knocking on the window in the middle of the night, deep in the woods, it didn't make sense. I slowly approached the window, trying to convince myself it was just an animal, a branch swaying in the wind. But when I looked out into the dark, there was no movement, just the trees, their silhouettes looming like dark sentinels. Then, just as I turned to walk away, I heard the knock again. Knock. Knock. It was louder this time, closer. My heart pounded in my chest as I stepped back from the window. My hands were trembling, and I felt like I was being suffocated by the silence. I turned to look at the others, but none of them stirred. Ben was sprawled out on the couch, his face buried in a pillow. Sarah was still curled up, her body tense, like she was having a bad dream. Mike, as usual, was snoring softly. Knock. Knock. The sound came again, but this time it wasn't just at the window. It was everywhere, all around the house. Knock. I felt my breath catch in my throat. My pulse was a steady drumbeat in my ears. The knocking was coming from all directions now, from the back door, the windows, even the walls. It was like something or someone was trying to get in. I ran to the other side of the cabin, my heart pounding in my chest. I pressed my back to the wall, trying to steady myself, trying to figure out what the hell was happening, but the knocking didn't stop. Then, suddenly, everything went still. The silence was suffocating. I turned, slowly, to face the room. The others were still asleep, unaware of the madness unfolding around them. I wasn't sure if I should wake them up or if it would be safer to leave them in the dark. I stepped back toward the window, my eyes scanning the trees. There, in the distance, I saw someone moving between the trunks. At first, I thought it was just a shadow, but as it drew closer, I could see the shape more clearly. A person. They were walking slowly, deliberately, their movements stiff and unnatural. They didn't seem to notice me watching them from the window, but that didn't matter. What mattered was the feeling that washed over me as I looked at them. They were not human. Their gait was wrong, too slow, too rigid, and their outline, something about it just didn't fit. The figure moved with an unsettling kind of purpose, almost like they were searching for something, or someone. I stepped back from the window, my heart racing, my entire body was trembling. I couldn't stay here anymore. I had to get out. I turned and shook Mike awake, gripping his arm hard. Mike, wake up. He groggily rubbed his eyes and looked at me with confusion. What the hell, man? It's middle of the night. There's someone out there. I whispered, my voice barely audible. We need to leave now. Right now. Mike blinked at me, still half asleep, then glanced at the others. What are you talking about? Who's out there? I didn't know how to explain it. I didn't have the words for what was happening. I just grabbed his arm and pulled him toward the door. Come on, now! I was almost out of the room when I heard Sarah's voice, clear as day, from behind me. Stop! I turned to look at her. Her face was pale, her eyes wide open, but she wasn't looking at me. She was staring at the wall, the same wall I had seen the figure standing in front of earlier. Sarah, I said, but she didn't respond. She just kept staring. And then I saw it. The wall was moving, like the house itself was breathing, shifting with every slow exhale. I backed up slowly, but Sarah's eyes never left the wall. Sarah, please, I said, my voice desperate now. Her gaze flicked to me for a split second, then returned to the wall. They're here, they're coming, she whispered, her voice distant, like she wasn't even aware of where she was. I didn't know what was happening. I didn't know if this was real or if we were all losing our minds, but what I did know was that we weren't safe here anymore. I grabbed Mike again, pulling him toward the door. Get the others. Now! I yelled. But as we turned to leave, the front door slammed shut with a deafening bang. We were trapped. I grabbed for the door handle, but it wouldn't budge. Something was blocking it from the outside. Mike, help! I shouted, but Mike was already backing away, his eyes wide with fear. Something's wrong. This isn't normal, he said, his voice trembling. I turned to the others. Ben was awake now, his eyes filled with panic. Sarah was still staring at the wall, her face expressionless. And then, I heard it, the knocking. But this time, it wasn't coming from the windows or the door. It was coming from inside the walls. The knocking in the walls grew louder, more frantic, as if whatever was inside was desperate to get out. The sound was deafening now, echoing through the house, vibrating in my chest like a drumbeat. We stood there, paralyzed. As the walls seemed to pulse with each knock, the air in the room grew thick, like something was pressing in from all sides, suffocating us. What the hell is happening? Mike screamed, his voice cracking with fear. He was pacing back and forth, looking at the walls, then the windows, then the door, but there was no escape. Ben was frozen, staring at Sarah, whose face had gone blank, her eyes wide and unblinking, like she was in a trance. She hadn't spoken since she whispered that something was coming. Sarah, I shouted, but she didn't respond. She was still staring at the wall, her pupils dilated, unseeing. That's when it hit me, the wall, the way Sarah had been looking at it. It wasn't just the knocking that was coming from inside the house itself was alive. It was alive, or something inside it was. I turned to Ben, my voice trembling. We need to get out. We need to leave right now. But Ben was staring at the walls too, his face pale, his mouth open in shock. It's too late, he whispered, his voice barely audible. Suddenly, a loud crash came from upstairs, followed by the sound of something heavy dragging across the floor. What the hell is that? Mike shouted, panic rising in his voice. I didn't wait for an answer. I bolted toward the door again, desperately trying to open it, but it was still stuck, blocked by something from the other side. It was like the house itself was holding us in. We have to get to the back door, I yelled. We scrambled toward the back of the cabin, trying to find another way out, but as we reached the hallway, the lights flickered on and off, casting eerie shadows on the walls. The knocking sound was now accompanied by a deep, guttural growl, like something was trying to force its way through the house itself. We reached the back door, and I tried the handle. It wouldn't budge. Why won't it open? Ben hissed, pulling at the door with all his strength. But it wasn't the door that wouldn't open, it was something inside. Something was holding it shut, something that had been there for longer than we could have imagined. And then, in the silence that followed, I heard it. A voice. A whisper, coming from beneath the floorboards. Help me. It was soft, like a child calling for help, but there was something wrong with it. The voice didn't sound human, and yet, it wasn't entirely inhuman either. It was distorted, like it had been trapped here for too long, twisted by something dark and unnatural. I dropped to my knees, my hands trembling as I pressed my ear to the floor. The voice came again, only this time, it was louder. Help me, please. The others were frozen behind me, staring at me with wide eyes, but I couldn't stop. The voice was pulling me in, drawing me closer to the floor. I had to understand what it was, where it was coming from. And that's when I saw it. A crack in the floorboards. I could feel it beneath my fingertips. Something was trying to crawl through. Don't touch it, Ben shouted, but it was too late. My fingers were already slipping between the boards, pushing them apart. What I found wasn't what I expected. It wasn't a child. It wasn't anything human at all. A hand, dark, twisted, and inhuman, shot up from beneath the floor, grabbing my wrist with a grip that felt like steel. I screamed and pulled back, but the hand held tight. From beneath the floor, a face emerged, or something that resembled a face. Its skin was stretched and thin, its eyes black and unblinking, and its mouth hung open in a grotesque grin. I staggered back in horror as the creature slowly dragged itself out of the crack, its form distorted and broken, like it had been trapped there for years. Its body twisted unnaturally as it crawled out, its arms too long and too thin. Get away from it, Mike screamed, but we couldn't move, we couldn't think. The thing in front of us was too terrifying to comprehend. But then, just as it seemed like the creature was about to reach out and grab us, something strange happened. The house began to shake. The walls groaned, the floorboards creaked, and the knocking inside the walls grew to a deafening roar. The house was alive, and it was angry. The thing in front of us froze, its black eyes locked onto mine for a moment, and in that moment, I understood. The creature wasn't the true danger. It wasn't the thing that had been trapping us. It was the house. The house itself had become a prison. Run, Ben screamed, finally snapping out of his paralysis. I didn't need to be told twice. I grabbed Mike, yanking him toward the back door. The house was groaning, shaking, like it was alive, like it was breathing with us inside it. The creature in front of us hissed, but I didn't look back. We had to get out. We shoved against the back door, and this time, finally, it opened. We bolted into the yard, the cold night air hitting me like a slap to the face. I didn't stop. I didn't look back. I just ran as fast as I could, hearing the others behind me. We didn't look back. We couldn't. When we reached the car, I threw open the door and jumped inside. I didn't care who drove. I just wanted to get out of there. As the engine roared to life, We sped down the narrow road, away from the cabin, away from the woods. I never looked back, but I still hear it, the knocking, the whisper, the sound of something waiting, something trying to get out. Whatever it was, it's still out there, in the woods. And maybe, just maybe, it's waiting for someone else to make the same mistake we did. Don't forget to like, comment your thoughts on this terrifying story, and subscribe for more spine-chilling horror tales.